should be live.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, I'm Mary Jones, and I serve as chair of the Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence in this open meeting that's being conducted by a conference call and other electronic medium. Jim Kilmartin.
And Jim is absent today.
Okay, Jardine Coleman also absent.
I have not seen her log in today.
Okay. I know about Nicole. John Fleeker.
I'm here.
James Godby.
Here.
Chris Haben.
Here.
And Marcy Lichtenberg. Have we heard from her?
I believe she'll be absent today. And actually, Jardine just logged into the meeting, so she is present as well.
Okay, welcome, Jardine.
Hi, I'm trying to work out getting on my computer. I'm on my cell phone for right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
We understand. We understand. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye and Leslie Allen. Next, David Fye will read a message regarding this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Mary. This is Dave Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. And Nicole Eitzen has logged into the meeting, so she is in attendance as well. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended, so we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On May 22nd, 2023, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice also stated that if there was, or it was also posted on the BSRB website at bsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if you experience any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check it before the meeting, and there is no one currently on the conference call line.
Okay, thank you very much, David. For the committee members, I'll bring your attention to the agenda that was provided in your packet, and we'll go through agenda approval. Are there any items that we wanted to add that's not on the agenda? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as written.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign? Thank you. You've also been provided a copy of the minutes from our meeting from April 14th. Please take a minute to review those minutes if you haven't, and if there aren't any addition or changes, I'll take a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Jardine. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Oh,
John, we'll take your second, John. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Great. David, I'll hand it over to you for your executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Mary. We'll start with some operations updates for the BSRB, and then I'll touch on some legislative updates and then some items from the last board meeting that occurred on May 8th. First, in terms of operations updates, So the BSRB, we have been working on implementing a lot of the different provisions of sub for Senate Bill 131. That's a bill that passed this session. And when I get to legislative updates, I'll talk quite a bit more about the different items in that bill that was recently enacted. But we are trying to roll out the different items for that. As part of that process, when new things occur, there's a lot of work behind the scenes with our website to make sure that we have things appropriately reflected. Also, we work with the agency that hosts our licensing database to make sure that we can issue the new types of licenses or modify changes to the system. And then also we have a payment portal and making sure all those things are lined up correctly. And so we've been working with different entities that we partner with and trying to get those all coordinated so we can roll those items out as quickly as possible. As part of the bill, we received authority to hire 2 new licensing specialist positions. The authority for us to hire those individuals begins after July 1st, 2023. So we have been in the position also of creating position descriptions for those new 2 individuals. As part of the hiring process, there's an extra step where even if we have authority to hire them and money in the budget, we still have to send that information over to the governor's office, and they have to give us authority to fill those positions. And so we went through that process. They approved our ability to fill those. I've been working with the Department of Administration to have those 2 advertisements for the 2 position descriptions put out there and advertised. And I believe those were either posted yesterday evening or they're posted this morning, but that will run for 2 weeks as we seek applicants for those 2 new positions. And then we will do a series of interviews with candidates after that time, hoping to bring individuals in probably sometime in August if the timeframe lines up correctly. However, to assist with some of the additional functions we'll be facing in the meanwhile, we have explored the possibility of bringing in temporary staff members to give us another set of hands and some assistance in terms of other responsibilities here in the office. And so we've had conversations with Department of Administration, with temporary staffing agencies, and we will have a new temporary staff member starting with us on Monday. And so she'll be helping us out as we kind of a bridge position until we can hire the new permanent members. And we're also seeking possibly to bring on one other temporary employee just to make sure that we can get an infusion of some additional assistance to make sure those things run quickly. Additionally, in the area of IT, we started a process 2 years ago to move staff members from their existing desktop computers to new laptops under the state's desktop as a service leasing program. It's important that we have good up-to-date technology. And so we transitioned 3 members that first year, and then we transitioned a few more last year. And this year we're transitioning over the remaining staff members. And so we'll be on a rotating basis going forward so that members will have those laptops replaced under the leasing program as they come up upon the end of their lease terms. Additionally, we received funding recently from federal COVID-19 Spark funding to purchase 2 pieces of equipment for our boardroom, an owl camera, and also a projector that was made available through a grant process where we could apply for funding under the umbrella of modernization of technology. And so on behalf of the agency, I submitted 2 requests. And when those were funded, we saved the agency about $2,100. And so those have been installed. And I've been in the process of submitting monthly reports on that federal funding. And just this past week, I attempted to do a closeout report with the checklist. And so I hope that has been resolved, or it's going to be close to being resolved, but really appreciate that funding being made available. And it's a benefit both to the agency and also to licensees, and that we were able to use the federal dollars for those expenditures. In terms of some legislative updates, there was a proviso that was put on the agency's budget this year that I wanted to kind of walk through and just clarify any questions on that item. In terms of the budget process, so the legislature passes at least one appropriations bill every year to approve budgets for all state agencies. For an agency like the BSRB, that is a fee-funded agency, we don't receive money from the state general fund to operate. We collect fees mainly through licensing, and then we have a fund that those are deposited into. And the function that the legislature serves in terms of our budget is that in the appropriations bill, they establish a limit on how much we're able to spend within our fee fund for that fiscal year. And so it will basically say for fiscal year 2023, which we're wrapping up right now, we can spend no more than X amount of dollars. And then we will have a budget request for 24 and also for 25. And so this year we proposed a revised budget estimate for fiscal year 2023 and then a budget request for 2024 and 2025. Before the legislature takes action, the governor actually makes recommendations on those expenditures first, and then the legislature considers the agency budget separately in both the House and the Senate. And so the governor made recommendations on expenditures for the agency, and then it went to the legislature for review. On the Senate side, the Senate committee recommended the same amounts recommended by the governor, and that was moved forward to the Senate version of their appropriations bill. On the House side, the House had questions about one of the items that the board had requested in a policy bill. So it was separate from the budget process, but when I present the budget information to the budget committee, they can ask me questions on anything. And they started asking questions about one of the items in the policy bill. In the original version of that policy bill that was requested from the legislature this year, the board had made a recommendation and asked for some statutory language to require a new continuing education requirement. Currently, right now, for individuals who are able to diagnose and treat, they must have 3 hours of ethics and 6 hours in diagnosis and treatment every 2-year renewal cycle. In the bill that the board had requested, that would change. And so the 6-hour requirement in diagnosis and treatment would decrease from 6 to 3 hours. And there would have been a new 3-hour requirement in the area of cultural diversity every 2 years. And I will talk about those items a little bit more when we talk about the bill specifically. But essentially on the budget side, they asked questions about the new proposed cultural diversity continuing education requirement. And what the budget committee on the House side chose to do was to add language to the agency's budget, which would prevent the agency from requiring as a condition of renewal or original licensure any training or education in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical race theory, and some other related terms. The BSRB does not currently require training in those areas, but the effect of that proviso would have been that it would have limited our ability to require such things in the future, as it would have been applied to fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. That moved on to the House Appropriations Committee, and they confirmed that they wanted that to stay attached to the agency's budget. And then essentially the House passes an appropriations bill, the Senate passes an appropriations bill. They come together to resolve items of difference. And so in the conference committee, when they were resolving items of difference, it was the combined legislative position to go ahead and keep that language on the BSRB budget. So the legislature did pass an appropriations bill. That bill did go to the governor, and the governor has authority to veto certain bills. When it comes to appropriations bills, she has authority to do line item vetoes. And so one of the items that she provided a line item veto to was that proviso language that the legislature had proposed for the BSRB. So she vetoed that from the bill. When the legislature came back for the very end of session, they have the authority to consider possible veto overrides. And so one of the items they considered overriding was that governor veto on the BSRB language. By one vote, the veto override failed, which meant that the governor's veto was upheld, which meant that the proviso that the House originally had proposed essentially went away. And so that is not on the agency's budget for fiscal year 24 and 25. I'll kind of talk a little bit about how that connects with the bill that the agency had requested, but I understand that there was a lot of discussion about that proviso language during most of this spring. And so I wanted to let you know sort of the steps that we walked to get to this point, and then also the final resolution that essentially it was vetoed out of the appropriations bill, and that's where things stand. So I think before I move to the agency's bill, I'll go ahead and pause and see if there's any questions on that proviso language. Okay, well, there's no questions. Let's go ahead and move to the BSRB bill. This year, last year, you as advisory committee members and then ultimately the board had a lot of discussions about items for change. And the advisory committees and the board were really looking at trying to make sure that we're upholding the mission of the agency, protecting the public, while keeping in mind some current issues the state of Kansas is facing, such as workforce challenges and the need to modernize some of the language and the regulations and also the statutes, understanding that there are changes as we move forward in terms of technology and different things like that. And the board and the advisory committees did a lot of work and put forward a very big bill for consideration by the legislature. The bill that was requested, I believe originally was somewhere around 70 pages long, and it included quite a few items. That bill was originally introduced on the House side as House Bill 2340. It moved to the House Health and Human Services Committee. It was passed out of that committee with some adjustments. There were 3 items that were removed from the bill, 3 items that were added, and then ultimately it passed the House floor, went to the Senate committee. The Senate committee made a small amendment to the bill. It went to conference committee. There were further adjustments, and then ultimately the bill was passed, and it was passed as Senate Bill 131, and that's because when it goes to conference committee, sometimes the bills can be combined. And so there was a bill that involved the Board of Healing Arts and a bill that involved the Board of Pharmacy that were combined with the BSRB bill, but each of those was about 1 or 2 pages long. So the vast majority of the final bill was the BSRB bill. So Senate Bill 131 did pass. The governor did sign it into law. And I know we had talked about this bill and some of the steps we had walked through up to this point, but I thought maybe it would be helpful would be to kind of clarify the items that were in the final version of that bill, and then talk a little bit about the items that were removed, and then just see if you have any questions in terms of the items that were in Senate Bill 131. So as a summary of the items that are in that approved Bill 131, the board had looked at the existing statutes for reciprocity for most of the professions. And currently what those statutes require is that for individuals seeking licensure and coming from another state, and they wish to have licensure through reciprocity, there is a statute for most of the professions that would say you either need to come from a jurisdiction with substantially equivalent license requirements, or you need to meet other standards. And as part of those other standards, the existing requirement would be that you had to practice in that jurisdiction for 48 of the past 54 months. And the board was supportive of changing that from 48 months to 12 months, as long as you are practicing with a similar scope of practice. And then there's a few other requirements you would need to meet in that statute for reciprocity. Additionally, the board was supportive and requested language to address a situation with the social work profession. There are new programs that are starting and are entering the accreditation process. And once they reach a standard called candidacy, they are showing their accrediting body that they are meeting benchmarks along the process to become accredited. However, that process to become accredited can take about 3 to 3.5 years. And so what we have right now is you have students who come through those programs and graduate while the school is in candidacy, but essentially they are graduating from a program that is not accredited. And so when those applicants apply for licensure, right now we don't have a way to move them forward as if they are from an accredited program. They would have to meet the alternate requirements in licensure, and some of those new programs are online only. And so that creates some difficulty in terms of meeting those regulations for licensure. So the new language added to the bill would establish a new type of temporary license for graduates from programs that are in candidacy for accreditation, both the master's and the bachelor's level of social work applicants. And so that they would be able to, if their school was in candidacy, they would be able to move forward and be able to take the test for social work. And as long as they passed the licensing examination, they would be able to get that new type of temporary license. And then once their program becomes accredited, then they would be able to get a permanent license. It's a model that was based off of what is currently working in Minnesota. And it was a lot of members of the legislature responded to it with a lot of positive praise for that. There's another item the board recommended and requested in the bill to create a new type of student temporary license for the addiction counseling profession. And that would be for individuals seeking to obtain the coursework for a permanent addiction counselor license. It would be similar to what was in existence several years ago called a counselor in training back under the days of SRS. But essentially, it's a way that individuals can start to work in a structured environment on their pathway towards becoming an addiction counselor. And so there was a lot of positive comments about that as well. Another item that's included in the final version of the bill is that as of July 1st, 2023, we'll be able to start issuing temporary licenses for 2 years instead of 1 year. Some of the temporary licenses under the board for the psychology and master's level psychology are already 2 years, but for 4 of the other professions, they are lasting for 1 year. And the board was supportive of making it so that we could issue those for 2 years. In part, we heard that there were some individuals who were having difficulty passing the licensing examinations. And with these temporary licenses, they're able to work during a period of time where they're also attempting to pass those examinations. So making this so we can issue them now for 2 years will allow more time for individuals to take the examination again. If they're unsuccessful, we hope they all pass the first time, but knowing that that's not realistic for everyone, but it also provides more security for employers who are employing these individuals with a temporary license, knowing that they can be able to work for up to 2 years, even if they are not able to pass the licensing examination. Additionally, the board was mindful about workforce issues, knowing that as we are trying to assist with helping more people become licensed, there's also a need to help individuals who are currently licensed maintain their licensure. And we know that there have been some situations that have come up for individuals who have come to the end of their license period, and for one extreme reason or another, they were not able to finish their continuing education hours. And so the board was supportive of adding language for the professions to allow individuals to request additional time to complete those hours. Now, they would still, if they're approved for this, they would still need to renew their license by the expiration date, but they could be approved for up to 3 months of additional time to be able to complete those remaining continuing education hours. They would have to show that there was an extenuating circumstance, so that they had to show that there was an extreme reason why they weren't able to finish the hours by the deadline. And they would have to provide a plan for how they're going to complete those hours. But if they were approved, this would allow more people to continue to maintain their license, which we think will be helpful in terms of addressing workforce as well. There's also a requirement they can't use it in back-to-back license periods. So this is not something that we're going to have people continually use, but when it's necessary, it will be a nice way to make sure people can keep their license. Additionally, the board was also mindful of individuals that over the last several years have allowed their licenses to expire. And perhaps this was because of a health issue they experienced or someone close to them, professional burnout, or many other different reasons that individuals might choose to step away at one point or another. However, for those individuals to come back to the profession and have their license reinstated, they would need to pay essentially double the license fee currently. And they would also need to show that they had completed all the continuing education hours from the previous license period. And so to help people re-enter the workforce and become licensed again more easily, the board requested 2 different items. One was that if individuals have really been away for some time, if their license had been expired for over a year, the cost to reinstate their license is cut in half. And so they're able to come back for just the amount of the renewal fee. And then also the board recommended creation of a new type of special 6-month reinstatement temporary license. And this would be for individuals who have not completed all of those CE hours needed to come back and have their license permanently reinstated. They would be able to come back and work for up to 6 months at the same time that they are completing those hours. And then once the hours are finished, they would be able to get their license fully reinstated. And so it's a nice way to get people back into the workforce more quickly as well. Additionally, the board looked at making some good corrections and cleanup to the statutes for the professions. One such item was for the licensed psychology profession. Currently, the standard for licensure requires good moral character. However, that standard does not match the other professions or the most common standard across the different states, which is to merit the public trust. And so that was one item that the advisory committee originally had requested be changed, and the board was supportive of as well. And so that will be changed to match the requirements for licensure for the other professions. Additionally, in terms of disciplinary regulations, the behavior analyst profession, when it was first created in statute as a licensed type body, the statutes were set up a little bit differently, and the disciplinary remedies did not match the disciplinary remedies for the other professions. For example, for the other professions, it states that we would be able to have a range of disciplinary remedies, such as a fine, public censure, renewal or suspension or revocation of a license, and conditions. But for the behavior analyst, we were limited to being able to suspend or revoke the license. And so to better match the need to have a range of possible penalties, that language has now been changed in statute to match the other professions, to provide more disciplinary remedy flexibility based on whatever the violation would be. And then additionally, the statutes did not include language to allow the agency to reinstate those licenses. So if one became expired, the only way that someone would have to practice again would be to start that process over again and reapply. And so now language has been added to the statute for regulations to be created to define the reinstatement process for that profession. And once those are put in place, we'll be able to reinstate those behavior analyst licenses after they expire, similar to what we do with the regular other professions. There was also some statutory cleanup that modified some of the language to make our statutes more readable, to organize them in a way that was more helpful. So those were some of the items in the final version of the bill. I mentioned the original bill request that included an item the board had requested about a new requirement in continuing education in the area of cultural diversity. That is something the board had proposed, a new 3-hour requirement of continuing education and cultural diversity for all licensees. The House committee did remove that item, so that item was removed from the bill. However, the legislature did indicate that as of July 1st, 2025, they would like the hours in diagnosis and treatment that need to be done every 2 years to be reduced from 6 hours to 3 hours. So that's not an immediate change. It won't affect anyone who's currently in their license cycle. But as of July 1st, 2025, the final version of the bill states that the hours for diagnosis and treatment will be decreasing from 6 hours to 3 hours every license cycle for those individuals who are able to diagnose and treat. Additionally, the board had requested some language to require board-approved supervisors for social work. That language was removed from the bill, so that is not included. And the board had also requested language to add a new board member for the behavior analyst profession, and that language was also removed from the bill, so that was not included. Just a few of the other items that were added to the final version of the bill by the legislature. One of the items involves individuals seeking licensure for the clinical social work license. And some of those changes that the legislature put in place strike some of the existing coursework that's required, specifically for individuals who are seeking that clinical level license for social work. Currently, right now, there are 5 specific classes and 15 hours of specific coursework related to diagnosis and treatment that must be obtained. The legislature struck 4 of those classes, and the 15 hours, they reduced that down to 3. So right now there is, when the bill goes into effect, there will just be 1 hour or one course that is 3 hours. That would be replacing the existing standard for that social work clinical applicant process. Additionally, there was some language that was modified in terms of the number of hours of postgraduate experience that those individuals have to obtain, and also the practicum they have to satisfy. The language currently states that the postgraduate experience would include 3,000 hours of direct client contact, including 1,500 hours diagnosing and treating individuals. That language has been modified to 1,500 hours, including but not limited to diagnosing and treating individuals. And there's some other adjusted language to provide a few other different items that must be performed as part of those 1,500 hours. But it does open it up quite a bit. It changes it from a standard that all 1,500 have to be diagnosis and treatment to not limiting those hours to that category. They still have to be all direct client contact hours, but that did create a change there. Another change that was put into the bill that we talked about last time was the creation of community-based licenses. These community-based licenses would function similar to the traditional temporary license. That new standard period of time is moving to 24 months or 2 years under the bill for the other temporary licenses. This new type of community-based license would be available for individuals who are under the scope of employment of community mental health centers. In conference committee, it was also expanded to individuals who are employed under the scope of employment at FQHCs, psychiatric residential treatment facilities, PRTFs, and there's also some different types of drug and alcohol facilities that are cited in statute. And so under this, these would be for individuals who have not passed the licensing examination for their permanent license, but essentially would be able to apply for this new type of license and then practice up to 2 years while taking that license examination. And then the other item that was added by the legislature dealt with some operating changes from the BSRB. One of the items would say that within 15 days of us receiving an applicant for licensure or permit, we would need to send a letter or a message to the applicant to let them know if we have a complete file or an incomplete file. And if it's incomplete, we would need to let them know what else is needed for it to be complete. And then once we have a complete file, we would need to issue a decision within 30 days of having a complete file. There's also language that states that the board would define in rules and regulations an expedited license process. And so that is something that the board will be working on in terms of creating that new expedited license process. So these were all the items that were included in the final version of the bill. There was quite a bit of movement during the process, and I've tried my best to keep the board and also the advisory committee members updated of all that. But I know there are a lot of items in this. One thing I will say is I mentioned earlier that the agency was really trying hard to implement these items as soon as possible. We are in a unique situation at the moment, which we are still trying to resolve. And so I'll just share that a little bit with you right now. The bill creates several new license types, and it also creates a statutory cap in terms of how much we can charge for those different types of licenses. The language in the statute or in law would say, for example, the new candidacy social work license that would be available to individuals for an amount not to exceed $150, let's say, for example. And then that establishes the cap in statute. And then what you would do after that point is you would follow that up and set the exact amount of the fee in regulation. And the regulation process is different from the statutory process. The statutory process goes through the bill process before the legislature. The regulation process, you need authority to actually do the regulations. You need authority from the statutes in order to do the regulations. So you can't do those dominoes in the wrong order. So the bill passed, which gave us authority to go and set the amount in regulations. In anticipation of the bill passing, we asked the board, if this passes, where would you like to set these amounts at? So we had the board basically provide input to us at the specific amount for those fees. But the process to set those fees and regulations, the regulation process can take some time. There is a way to do temporary regulations, which allows you to go ahead and put something into place for a period of time and then follow that up with a more permanent process. And so that's what we have been working on since the bill passed. We have put together a list of all of the fees that we are proposing to charge for the different amounts. And we have put those through as temporary regulations to the Department of Administration. Those will be going early next week to the Attorney General's office for their review. But right now, it is unclear to us whether we have authority to go ahead and start issuing those new types of licenses before those fees are set in regulation, but we are seeking guidance on that. We've reached out to multiple agencies for clarity on that. So in the meanwhile, we're working on things behind the scenes to make sure we can still issue things as soon as possible. But this is one of those technical type issues. And with that bill passing during the omnibus section, there was really no way for us to have done this any more quickly. These dominoes had to fall in a certain order, and we're doing them as quickly as we can. And so we're waiting to see now what legally our next steps can be. We want to be able to issue these as quickly as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're not exceeding our authority under the law. So that's where we are right now with those items. But hoping to send out some guidance to licensees to share more information, but we didn't want to put things out there that we couldn't back up while these things were being determined. So we've been working on these things, waiting to send something out. We have posted information about a separate bill that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But before I talk about that, I'll go ahead and pause and then see if you have any questions on those items in Senate Bill 131.
I had a question about the temp licenses. Will those that are currently under a temp license be extended for the 2 years, or would they have to reapply, or would they be eligible for the 2-year temp license?
No, the language of the bill would basically allow us after July 1st to issue temporary licenses that would last 2 years. So the existing ones that are already out there, those are still limited to what they were when they were issued. So those would only be 1 year. Now, there is a way if someone can show extenuating circumstances for needing an extension up to 6 months. So if you have anybody in an unusual category where they have dealt with an extreme situation, I would encourage them to contact us to see if they're able to request that extension for an extenuating circumstance up to 6 months. But unfortunately, we're not able to extend any of the existing ones for that extra year. It'll just be for newly issued ones after July 1st.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on Senate Bill 131? Okay, I realize I put a lot of information out there and we have talked about it a few times since then, but thought I'd focus on what's in the final bill and then just kind of our steps in preparation for it. But I've had many different meetings with many different entities to try to make sure this can be as smooth a process as possible. I know Leslie has been in a number of those meetings with me, and then separately, she's also been meeting with other people too. There's just a lot of work behind the scenes to make things go live, but we are doing our best to do that once we have the authority to do it and practically being able to do that as well. In terms of another legislative update, I did want to make you all aware there was a multi-state compact bill that passed under the BSRB that affect licenses under the BSRB. There was a House Bill 2288. It was a professional counseling multi-state compact that passed the House and the Senate by wide margins. Kansas will become a member of that compact when it goes into effect, basically on July 1st. And that compact is a relatively new compact. It just received enough states to start meeting as a commission last year. And so the actual infrastructure of that compact does not yet exist to be able to allow people to practice in different states under that compact. But the model that works for that compact is for professional counselors at the clinical level, when it's all set up, they will be able to request a privilege to practice in other compact states. And they will do that through the commission. And so it doesn't function exactly like a license. There's still the ability to get a license in different states. But essentially, if you have a professional counseling clinical license and you wish to practice in different compact states, once it's all set up, you would be able to get a privilege to practice and get that very quickly and be able to practice for that specified period of time in those other states. Like I said, it has not been fully developed. They're still having a lot of meetings in terms of making rules and developing their licensing system or their database, but they're hopeful that by the end of this calendar year or perhaps early next year, then it will be functional. In the meanwhile, the board has appointed Laura Shaughnessy to be the commissioner for Kansas, and I will be assisting her in that role, but she will be attending meetings on behalf of Kansas and collecting information and informing the board about updates for that compact. And as of July 1st, she'll be able to vote in those meetings as well. So we'll have a voice and be able to bring back some material for the board on that. Additionally, there was another bill that passed, Senate Bill 66, and that is a bill that essentially is creating a unified license verification portal for the different licensing bodies in the state of Kansas. The BSRB has an online license verification portal on our website, but I think the goal of that bill, one of them, is to create sort of a one-stop shop that if you have a military member who's wanting to verify a license in a different state or verify their license, you can go to this new spot that has not been created yet. And essentially, our verification system will provide information to that new verification system. So you'd be able to not have to go to all the different agency websites to check on a license. You can go to that instead. So we are trying to do the necessary work to work with the entities that are putting that together, but I'll keep you updated as that goes forward. In terms of a few other updates, the board met recently on May 8th. One of the items was that the board reappointed members of advisory committees to new 2-year terms. This advisory committee didn't have any members that were reaching the end of a term as of June 2023, but that means that you all will either be reaching the end of your term on the advisory committee or up for reappointment next year. So I'll be in contact with you next spring as we're approaching those dates. But did want to take this as an opportunity to thank all of you for your work on the advisory committee. Really enjoy working with all of you and look forward to keep working with you for the next year. Additionally, wanted to make you aware that in your packet of material for the meeting today, you have an item the board looked at the last board meeting as well. Over the last year, we've been talking about the unprofessional conduct standards for the different professions and those regulations. Each of the different advisory committees was making recommendations on possible changes. And so the board received a packet of about maybe 42 pages, which included the unprofessional conduct regulations for each of the professions with proposed changes. And then the board was informed those would be provided back to the advisory committees as a package so that the other advisory committees could look to see what the other groups had recommended to say, okay, well, do we want to make further changes to our unprofessional conduct regulations, or do we perhaps want to borrow from what some other group had already looked into? And so it's a way for you to share information between the different committees. And so that'll be one of the items on the agenda for later today. And the last item from that board meeting is once a year, the board seeks to hold an annual offsite planning meeting in person for the purposes of talking about the legislative agenda and other big topics of discussion. The board is supportive of having that again in person this year, and the date for that has been set as Monday, October 23rd, 2023. It'll be an all-day meeting. Most likely the location will be in Wichita, but we're still working on the logistics in terms of the specific location for that meeting. And then I did want to inform you, board members serve 4-year terms. They're all appointed by the governor. And we have 3 board members that are coming off the board at the end of June. And so at the end of June, Deb Stidham, who is the board member for addiction counseling, her 2nd term will be ending, so she'll be coming off the board. Rick Steele has been serving as a licensed psychology board member, and he is going to be stepping off the board. And then Jonna Norton is a public board member, and she'll be stepping off the board as well. But wanted to inform you about those new changes. They have gone ahead and let me know, and they've announced it publicly now too, that the new board members, Linda Heitzman Powell will be a new board member for the licensed psychology profession. David Stevens will be a new public board member. Their terms will start as of July 1st. There has not been an announcement about a new addiction counselor board member, but I'll keep you informed as that information is released. So with that, I will end my report and see if there's any questions.
I have another question. You mentioned a little bit ago about the BSRB sort of staffing up to help meet some of those new timeline requirements. Has there been any discussion from either within the BSRB or even among the board members about moving to an automated system or a more automated system for license renewal and just trying to eliminate the physical need for people? I know there are some other states that do online license renewals or applications, and I just wondered if we've thought about that yet.
We definitely have thought about it. There's a number of moving pieces right now. We do have an online license renewal process. About 90, maybe a little over 90% of our renewals renew through that online process. About 10% still prefer to renew on paper. We would like to move the initial applications to an online system as well, but we've had to kind of pause that as we worked through some other different topics. We've had some meetings recently with the agency that hosts our licensing database to be able to try to put in some more checks in place so that we can track to see that we're meeting the 15-day requirement and also the 30-day requirement. So we've been working on them to develop some things behind the scenes to kind of put some of those things in place. So we'll be able to run reports and track that information a little bit better than what we're able to do right now. We have had preliminary conversations about moving some of the paper process for initial application to electronic, and that is one of our goals. But the agency that we've worked with for our licensing system, they had experienced some staffing shortages, and so some of those plans had to be slowed a little bit from what we were previously seeking, but we're still willing to move forward on that. One of the other items that I didn't mention, but there's a lot of different things working behind the scenes. With bringing on board 2 new staff members physically, it's a challenge in terms of the space we have here in the office. We are pretty limited in terms of where we're able to set people up, but we have a little bit of space that we are currently using for paper storage of files. We have a document retention schedule for the state in terms of how long we have to keep different application materials and other paper records. And we are in the process of trying to change that so that we're not storing the records as long. We're also looking to see if we can convert from the paper storage to electronic storage. Now, if we get authority to do that, we'll have to expend some more resources to convert those records over. But our goal and hope is that we can convert a lot of the existing space and open that back up for offices to have more space for staff, and then get away from some of the paper records that we currently have. And I think that'll help us be more efficient. And then when those things are scanned in, I think that will help with efficiency as well. Right now, based on how our processes are set up, there's a lot of need to have staff members here physically in the office. And we receive a lot of those applications physically through the mail, and then we have to combine the different things into certain files. And I think once we move to the electronic process, it'll be better. It's just kind of getting to that process while we're also trying to implement all of the existing other new items as well. So there's a lot of things that are in motion, but that is definitely, those things you talked about are definitely some goals, and we would like to move that direction for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for that update.
Any other questions or thoughts? David always gives us a lot of information to listen to and digest. Okay, hearing none, we'll kind of go back to the agenda. Thank you so much, David, for that update. There's been a lot, and just for this advisory committee to know that David and his team have been really busy this first quarter of the year, exceptionally, with all of these moving parts and changes, and have done a great job being flexible and adapting to these new statutes that came in, and making sure that they're able to adhere to them as of July 1. So thank you for you and your team for that. On the old business item, we had continued discussion on the care for clients who are in crisis. Based on our meeting minutes last time, we sort of said this wasn't really something we were interested in acting on or suggesting any language on. I just wondered if I left it on here. We left it on here to just circle back to it and make sure that this committee wasn't really, we had some ambivalence around it last time around not wanting to require things for clinicians. Just want to touch base on that again before we move on to see if there weren't any other thoughts after the last advisory meeting. Great, I'll move on to the next item. The continued discussion on clinical training plans. So in your packet, you have an attachment for the KAR 102.5.7a discussion on clinical training plans. And I'll let David certainly jump in here too, but the gist of this particular item is this requirement for 45-day change. So we know as a board that there have been folks that have submitted or have not submitted changes within that 45 days, and that will inactivate or nullify those clinical hours that they've been trying to accrue during that period of time. So the board has had some discussion about what this could look like, and would we make any suggested changes? And what are those things that have to be reported to the board in 45 days? So we brought this up last time as just sort of a let's bring it forward to this meeting. If you've had time to think about it, David, I'll stop and make sure I'm rounding out that conversation well enough from your perspective too. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think you summarized it great. And this is in your packet of materials. It's KAR 102-5-7A. And this is item H. So the last item in that regulation. But Mary, I think you summarized that perfectly. Essentially, the board was looking at a couple different parts of this existing regulation. It does say in this regulation that all changes to the clinical supervision training plan shall be submitted by the supervisee to the board for its approval. But it doesn't really define what it means by all changes. And there has been some discussion from time to time as far as whether a change was truly a change, or whether it was just a small modification. And there was also the topic of the 45-day requirement that you discussed, and that if someone makes a change and fails to provide that to the board for review and approval, then any hours that they accrued after the 45 days would not count towards the total number of hours. And so there has been discussion by the board, and several other advisory committees have talked about this as well. The need perhaps to modify this language to add some items into this regulation that would create a spotlight on those items in terms of what's truly important for individuals to provide to the board when they make certain changes. And then also if there is an alternative to the 45-day requirement that would serve the same purpose as what the board is trying to serve. The 45-day requirement is trying to motivate people to send things in so that they're not doing things that wouldn't qualify. But the penalty, if they don't report that, is pretty severe. And so we don't want people to lose all those hours if it's not a necessary step. But we also do want to make sure that people are in compliance with the requirements of the training plan and what's required. So we are collecting feedback from advisory committee members. If you have thoughts on specific changes that you would want to make or list here in the regulation, or alternatives to the 45-day requirement. And I just kind of want to open that up for discussion or see if you have any questions on that topic.
I think last time we had some good discussion. I do think if we could clarify when a change needs to be made, I don't think the 45-day window personally is that bad. I think that's a fair amount of time, and that's just my opinion. But I do think if we could clarify, like when these items change as a part of your plan, that's when a change needs to happen. That would, I think, clarifying that would be good for people so that they know, like, these are when I have to make a change, and I've got 45 days to get that submitted. In my experience, with the BSRB, even if it were to take 30, I think they say that it could take up to 30 days to review. The BSRB has always been really good about approving at the date that it was submitted, though. And so with most of my supervisees, even if they've had to make a change to something, the BSRB has still honored the application date, even if one little change needed to be made on our end, because we didn't type something in right or something like that. So I feel like the BSRB has been a good partner with that, but that's just my opinion. I think if we could just clarify some language, but I think the 45-day window is appropriate, but curious what other people think.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that, Nicole. I think it's a reasonable time frame. And that gives people the opportunity to do ahead of time, knowing a change, or after the fact. I feel like the 45 days is a nice liberal window. Other committee members, thoughts on that?
I think 45 days is more than fair. I ran into something with a postgrad, though their office site moved locations. And so it was a question of like, okay, is that something is the training plan different? It's the same practice. Everything is the same, except it just was occurring in a different location. And I think it was like, did I update that? Should I update? Now, to me, if, with things like, if I get asked that, like, well, if you're in doubt, submit it. But beg the question to me of like, what really constitutes the things that need updating?
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, because that's exactly what we're looking at. And I think the BSRB in general has looked at address changes as just an update of address. And so, but that's a great point to what we're making. In terms of this conversation, what are those critical pieces? Yes, a supervisory change, right now I'm thinking of the things that we've had sort of come before us, a job description change, which is also interesting because sometimes titles change, but the content of work stays the same. So that's something that's definitely come up. Work location is one of them.
Job changes.
Sorry, John?
Said job changes.
Yeah, job changes, definitely in that. So I think there, for us, I have always a little bit of trepidation of writing exactly what we want changes on, because then it's like you are stuck to that, and something will come out. But I think the guidance here is really helpful for people to say, what is it that I have to do? So job changes.
I wonder if sorry, Mary, I didn't mean to say.
No, go ahead.
I can't remember. I don't have it in front of me now, but like the 19 or 20 questions that we have to fill out, it would seem like anything related to that would certainly reflect something that would need an update.
Okay. So looking at, because a lot of those have to do with roles of the workplace site, substantial, like understanding of the clientele or the population served. So if there's a dramatic change in the population you're serving, you're kind of thinking along that lines.
I just assume those are what are used to determine, I mean, those are what are approved. So if that's going to change, that seems, I don't know if that's a helpful thought. On the other hand, well, sometimes, so like if I say we're going to track supervision hours differently with a different form, if that form changes, does that require an update? That seems a little ridiculous. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
that's
think-
not as helpful as I thought.
Yeah, I think that interpretation though has been, I think people have an understanding of changes mean if I change jobs, if I change supervisors, obviously there's a form that is goes with that. And maybe some of these other changes, because they don't have necessarily forms that go with them, people have been a little bit more gray, like address changes or job title changes. I was just pulling that. There is the amendment for the work site. So that everyone's pretty clear on work site, although we've had that before us where someone didn't report a work site change. I'm just going to go into those questions. Look at.
I almost, as you're looking at that, Mary, I wonder if like 13 through 18, maybe not all 18, because the first 18 are, or the first, sorry, 12, you pretty much have to answer it a certain way, I think, to get your supervision plan approved. But 13 through 18 is pretty specific to that person.
Yeah, Nicole, I agree with that. Just looking through some of the things, I think we all sort of say supervisory changes, yes, fill the form out. Work site changes, yes. Sometimes this job title and position comes up. So what do we think about that particular item? I will say the board has, in these cases that we've had to look at, have been trying to look at, did the scope of work change with their clinical work, in trying to look at some of the grayer areas in those.
I guess it depends on if they're still providing direct services or not. I mean, honestly, if it, back in the day when I got promoted while I was under my training plan, but I still did face-to-face services additionally.
Mhm.
To make sure I was getting my hours. So sometimes if you get promoted, that doesn't always mean that you're still providing direct service.
Yeah, certainly. I get that. And I think that's common that happens for people in the workforce, that they're promoting, moving, but still doing the clinical work. Is title change as important as that? You know, so would it be if we said something like substantial changes to the clinical practice and population? Is that too gray?
That feels gray. Maybe just saying in job description and responsibilities. It's a little more specific. I also, this is related to this topic, but not on this list of things. I'm wondering about whether maybe I should just say what I think. I think that not counting the hours, regardless of whether they qualify or not, is harsh. And that perhaps the statement is that hours may not qualify pending whatever the change was. Like maybe that's the way around that. I mean, it does feel, I think we talked last time or have previously discussed folks who have accrued 50% of their hours and didn't submit a change, and now they can't get licensed, even though they have done the clinical work and their new position does qualify. And that feels awful to have to do that to people. And that I hope, I wish Ann was here, but I hope that that's a few and far between example, but I could certainly see why it's easy to make an enemy of the BSRB if they're cutting your last year and a half of work out and you have to keep working for a clinical.
Yeah, Jardine, that's really pertinent to this conversation because we have seen this. And when we, if the board is bound and the BSRB staff is bound to what's in statute and what's in regulation, there's not a lot of gray.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's an interesting point. My sort of counterpoint to that is that does put a lot of discretion into the BSRB staff or the board if we're having to look at something like that. But that's, maybe there's a both in here, right? Of maybe we look at the word may versus shall.
Yeah.
And then also give some examples of what are the things that the board really wants, just for that point, that we want to make sure. David spoke to this really well the other day of what if they were doing something that was out of scope and would not be approved, and that requirement to notify the board is a way to say, this is actually not okay. This isn't. So other comments to that.
Well, and I think it might be helpful at this point to kind of share what some of the other advisory committees have talked about, because I think you're speaking kind of in a similar way that some of those comments have gone. One thing they had talked about is, and Mary, to your point too, you're right. When the regulation says something, if it's very firm, as a licensing body, our responsibility and our staff are basically going to stick to the line. And so when it says all changes to the clinical supervision plan have to be submitted, then our staff is going to tell people, you have to submit all changes. It has to be any change, you have to submit it. And then for the 45-day thing, the board is really kind of held to, unless something would not be considered a change, there's not a lot of flexibility there. But that's partly why this whole conversation is being discussed, because if the law is the law, we have to defend it, but if the regulation is something that we can modify and we can have a reasonable conversation about it, the board has been very supportive of having those conversations, which I'm very happy about, because I like having these kind of conversations and looking at things again. But some of the advisory committees have talked about that first line. Instead of it saying all changes, it would say all substantial changes to the clinical supervision training plan shall be submitted by the supervisee to the board for its approval, including but not limited to, and then listing a few things like that. So that way we kind of, instead of it just saying all changes, it would come down, it would be a weighing factor, but we would talk about it being a substantial change. And then we would specifically spotlight or highlight a few different items that we would list here, but also making it clear this is not the extensive list. These are things we really want to call your attention to. So if these do change in your situation, you definitely should report them. And then in terms of the 45-day thing, what some of the advisory committee members from other committees had talked about was having some language that, right, instead of it saying if the supervisee fails to submit the changes to the board within 45-day period, no supervised hours of practice shall be accrued or credited. Basically, one of the modifications others had talked about would be something like, if the supervisee fails to submit the change to the board within that 45-day period, the board may reject hours accrued after that time if they are not in compliance with the requirements for those hours of practice or something like that. So,
yeah, right up where Jardine was recommending. Yeah,
and that would provide the board some discretion. And so it might mean a few more cases would go in front of the board when someone applies for licensure to see if those hours count, but it would also not tie the board's hands as much. So they would have some options on that too. So
yeah, I do like that.
Other comments and thoughts? I really think those are good changes and right in line with the discussion here. Other comments or thoughts there?
Yeah, I really like those ideas. I would be very supportive of those.
Yeah, and I think those such as things like supervisory changes, practice setting changes, substantial changes to job description or scope of work. Those would be really good examples to put in there.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, any other thoughts on this?
Nope, I'm on board.
Okay. Great. Wonderful. I think those are great suggestions, and a great thoughts around how to make this easier for supervisees and supervisors as well. The next item on our agenda is discussion on regulations for continuing education. You have in your packets 102.510 and 102.511. Have those. David, I don't know if you were going to pull those up for us.
I can share those. Sure.
Great. So this is one of those things that has not been updated in a very long time. And so as David's and the board has tasked the advisory committees of looking through these things that really have been largely untouched. This is one of those areas that there are some sort of language issues in here that just are dated, but also to the extent of, is there something that we think needs to be modified? And I'll hand it over to David, because I know you talked a little bit earlier to me about, these sort of self-directed courses and things like that that you're seeing across other advisory committees.
Yes, so thanks, Mary, and you're right. The legislature has asked us to be good stewards of the regulations and make sure that we're updating these as needed in a timely manner, and that our regulations really are helpful in terms of implementing law. This regulation has not been updated in 20 years. It was last updated in 2003. As one of the items to be helpful to the different advisory committees, one thing that I did look at too, so the regulations do specify the total number of continuing education hours for the license period. In the statute, it talks about the 3 hours in ethics and the 6 hours currently in diagnosis and treatment. But in terms of the total number of hours, that's not in the statute, it's just in the regulation. So there is more flexibility to review that. I did some research, and I looked at all the states that license marriage and family therapy and how many hours they require. For the states that have a 1-year license, I prorated it to match our 2 years to see where we were at comparably. And for marriage and family therapy, the standard for most states, or for the majority of states, is 40 hours. So we are in line with what the other states are requiring in terms of total number of hours. There are some that require less. I think there are some that require a little bit more, but the majority, like the most common number for all the states, is the 40 hours. So we are in line with that. In terms of, I just have a couple of small modifications, but I am completely open to any thoughts that any of you have. If when you were reviewing these, you thought perhaps there were some categories that aren't listed here that should be included, that's something we can definitely have a conversation about to see if we want to add those as possible ways people can get continuing education. I'll call your attention just as a couple little cosmetic changes. In item number 4 and item number 5, it talks about if a post-test is provided, an activity consisting of completing a computerized interactive learning module, viewing a telecast or videotape, listening to an audio tape, or reading. Essentially, one of the items that other advisory committees were looking at there is changing some of that terminology to update it. So instead of saying videotape, a video recording, same with an audio tape, an audio recording. We don't really use audio tapes and videotapes quite as much as we used to, but that would modernize it and make it a little bit match what we are commonly using more frequently now. So in 4 and 5, those have similar language, but one is if a post-test is provided, one is if it is not. So changing those makes sense, I think. And then in number 7, there's some language here about a self-directed learning project that is pre-approved by the board. And I've talked to Leslie Allen about this, and some of the other advisory committees have discussed this as well. This self-directed learning project is something that individuals don't frequently submit or request. And it seems like what might qualify under that might already qualify under other things. So it might qualify under other categories. And so a lot of the advisory committees are looking to see if number 7, that self-directed learning project, is suitable to be removed. And then the only other item that I would add just at the beginning here is the Social Work Advisory Committee recently made a recommendation to add a new category to receive community continuing education, and that is for individuals who are coaching or mentoring individuals who are preparing to take the licensing examination. And so they have recommended adding, I believe it's up to 10 hours every 2-year license period, so that individuals who are providing that coaching or mentoring are able to get hours for that practice of mentoring or coaching. So just some thoughts for you, but wanted to see what your thoughts were on any other changes or on those changes as well.
Well, I'm certainly comfortable with the 40-hour requirement and wouldn't want to reduce that in any way. I think, our intent is that people continue to grow professionally and develop their skills. So I don't see any changes to that. I'm in agreement with just updating language. I think, for me, there would be an opportunity for people to do a self-directed learning project, but if the evidence and
Sorry, Mary, I think you may have froze.
are that people submit that. Here.
A little bit. Oh, now you're back.
Okay, sorry, Mary, I think we just missed your last comment. Your screen froze for a second.
Yeah, I just got an internet stable. Can you hear me? Unstable. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now.
I think I was just opening it up for discussion on what the comments were for the advisory group.
Okay, and Leslie Allen, could you share just a little bit on that self-directed learning project? You might have a little bit more information on if individuals have tried to do anything for that.
So since I've been with the board, I think I've only approved 2 or 3 of those, and it was many years ago. We just don't have that come up, and there's no requirements around it, like what it can and can't include or anything like that. So it's not used anymore.
My cynical notion is that people are probably not preparing in advance far enough to do that.
Probably.
Is this an area that we would like to keep, or do we think this should be removed based on the fact that no one's using it?
I'd be in favor of removing it.
Same.
Same.
Okay. Is everyone in agreement on the number of hours at 40? Okay. Other thoughts, such as mentoring or preparation for helping people pass exams, licensing exams?
My knee-jerk response to that is that that feels a little loose to me in terms of how to count that and to verify that.
So I believe for the social work, in terms of their documentation of that, it was an attestation by the person who was receiving the mentoring or the coaching.
Yeah, I from a field practice thought, we are seeing this anecdotal trend of people who are in temp licensure having a more difficult time passing exams. And I know there's a lot of discussion in agency type work about how to help people study and prep for licensing exams. So to me, I can follow that into why that would have made it into the advisory committee's discussion. I too kind of wonder, what does that look like? And is that kind of loose? And, so.
Well, and if I'm mentoring somebody, maybe because I teach our diagnostic class here and I'm mentoring them, can I get all 6 hours of my diagnosis, or after 2025, my 3 hours of diagnosis? Same with ethics. Am I making sense by that?
Yeah. I'm not a fan of the idea of counting mentoring. That doesn't feel like continuing education to me.
I think my only thought would be with that, Jordan, is that we do allow supervision to count in here for continuing it. I think people can, like, for up to 15 hours. So I do kind of feel like it's similar to that, and I wonder if we either could we put it in with this, or it could be another line item, but it's again a maximum amount. So you could get up to, I don't know what the other practice or the other areas are looking at, if they're looking at a maximum amount of 5 hours or something like that. I don't know.
I guess I think supervision is different because there's some standards around supervision. And mentoring, there's no standards around mentoring.
Sure.
And I can informally mentor people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's enhanced. I don't know. I
hear that.
Yeah.
I don't find myself leaning towards being in favor of it either. I think the argument about supervision makes sense. If we did, I would want to limit that. And when I'm looking here, like 10 hours for a professional journal article or mentoring somebody for a while, just I don't know, it just standard just doesn't seem the same to me. Maybe I'm too snooty.
Yeah. Similarly, am I reading, and maybe David, you can help, am I reading this right, that for number 2, that if I teach, I could use, so it says up to a maximum of 15 per credit hour. So I could teach one class and that would potentially get, like, 1 3-hour class would get me all my hours. If it's DSM, then it would give me everything, maybe except ethics or vice versa. Am I reading that right?
I think I'll defer to Leslie Allen on that. She works mostly with our renewal specialist in terms of the continuing education. So
okay.
So yes, if you took a 3 credit hour course,
if I teach.
If you teach, only if it's the first time preparation and presentation of that.
Okay.
Or substantial change in the course.
I see.
And then redid it all.
Okay. Number 2 is if I'm in the class.
Right.
That makes sense. Okay.
Now you could potentially add language to number 2 to further clarify that, if you thought that would be helpful.
Yeah, I know personally I'm appreciative of the credits that are used for preparation for classes, because that falls in line. And I think to your point, Chris, if you're teaching an ethics class, that actually can be your ethics credit. Teaching a diagnostic class, the same. It's my understanding. Leslie will correct me.
Yes, that's number 9.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the exclusions for sort of other trainings that are generally workplace related, like first aid, CPR. I don't really have other, I think Dave shared with me some other states that allow continuing ed for volunteer service and things like that are probably a little bit farther out of even what I'm hearing, where we want to go with mentoring and coaching to licensing exam. But there are states that allow, I think, was election workers, if you volunteer,
Yeah, during an election, if you volunteer to serve at a polling place,
Yes.
they allow a certain number of hours for that. But it's not a uniform standard, but I have heard of that in some other states.
I feel pretty comfortable with this, with what we've discussed here. Does anyone else see opportunities to add?
I think clarifying, going from the audio tape, maybe clarifying that even further to like to include an audio book specifically, because I know a lot of people are doing audiobooks these days.
Okay, so so this be for number
For number 4, yeah. So maybe if it's listening to an audio recording or audio book or reading. An audio recording could be just an audio. I mean, I don't know. Well, I guess it could be an online something that has an audio recording attached to it that doesn't have video. But being explicit that reading includes listening to books.
Okay, so if we said, let's say, and a video recording or listening to an audio recording or audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a bit redundant. I don't know when I think of audio recording, unless you think it needs to be specifically called out for clarification.
For audio recording?
Yeah.
It does sound redundant.
I feel like audio recording would encompass an audiobook, but that's just me. That may just be me.
Maybe. I mean, they're being approved, so.
That's the good news, right?
That's the good news, yeah.
It's a good thing because I listen to them all the time. So I have an hour drive back and forth. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe not, but other than that, I think I like what's in there, and I haven't had a thought of I wish this counted for CEUs and it didn't count. So
I do have a minor thing, and I'm a little hesitant to say it because it feels awfully self-focused. But when I think about preparing an MFT course, I've been away. I used to teach a diagnostic course here for a while. I've been away for about 5 years from it and came back to it. Now it's the DSM-5 TR, instead of the 4 when I was teaching before, or the ethics code gets upgraded. And so it isn't the first time I'm teaching it, but there are many things that I'm changing as a result of what's going on. And I feel like that can only be counted one time for what goes into that, and the preparation. I feel like that really involves a lot in terms of I don't know, my own advanced learning. So that sometimes feels ironically a bit restrictive.
So there is, and I can't tell you off the top of my head which profession that is, but they have in their preparation and presentation, they have the option of substantial revision of the course.
Okay, so which, let's see which item.
number 9.
Yeah.
So could you pull that, right? So if we added some language here, preparing for and presenting for the first time, or somehow substantial revision of course content.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I mean, I agree. I step into teaching infrequently, and when I do, I'm dusting things off and making sure they're current, and it does take quite a bit of time. Okay.
I think it's a good change. Yeah.
Okay, so it would say preparing for and presenting for the first time or substantial revisions of content for a marriage and family therapy course. That sound about right?
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts?
If not, how about if I take 30 seconds? I think our staff member who's taking minutes for this meeting might appreciate a little quick rundown, and then we can all make sure we're on the same page about the final ones too.
Okay.
So it sounds like there was discussion on the 40 hours, and the consensus was to make no change to that. For items 4 and 5, it would change video tape to video recording. It would change audio tape to audio recording. And then number 5, it would change videotape to video recording and audio tape to audio recording. And what we can do is we can ask our renewal specialist to see if we receive any questions about audiobooks. And if we do start getting some questions on that, we can bring it back to you to say it would be helpful to have some further clarification. But I can talk to our renewal specialist to kind of collect some feedback on that. So right now, maybe we can just change it to audio recording and then revisit it in the future if we get comments like that. For number 7, remove self-directed learning project. Do not add a new item for coaching or mentoring for people who are preparing to take the licensing examination. But for number 9, modify the language so it would say preparing for and presenting for the first time or substantial revision of content for a marriage and family therapy course, seminar, et cetera, et cetera. Does that sound pretty good?
Mhm.
Great.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. The next piece to that was in 102.511 documentation of continuing education. So I don't know if you had a chance to review those, but is there any thought about, do we need revisions or changes to how we need to maintain documentation? I guess we would have to change I and remove that.
Can't help but say good eye.
As a cosmetic change for J, we would do a similar change for the term video tape and audio tape and just change those to video recording and audio recording.
I think everything else looks good besides taking I out in that language.
Is a signed statement a certificate of completion?
Well, those are signed. If you get a CEU certificate or certificate of completion, there's a signature on it. Are you referring to which particular item?
So there's like B and C both talk about a signed statement by the instructor or the institute, and I'm just verifying a signed statement is a certificate, not like a.
So would you like to, should we add that? Should we say signed statement or certificate?
I mean, that feels more clear to me.
Do you like certificate or do you like certificate of completion?
Of completion.
Nice. May I ask something here? I may regret this. One thing I get asked a lot is, am I qualified to do a continuing ed presentation? Can I, if I do a presentation, am I qualified, or who has to approve that? I know different disciplines have different approval processes. I don't know if this would be a place. I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, well, I feel qualified to do this, but I don't know if if you do. And I don't know if there needs to be a standard for that. And I don't know if this would be the place to do that. And I don't know if that's a good idea even to add that in there, because without it, it gives more freedom. But I get people asking about that a lot, and I don't quite know what to say to them, to be honest with you. Or if I were to ask somebody to do a continuing ed here, I'm like, am I qualified to do that? Well, you know, I would want to make sure you know what you're talking about.
Leslie, do you want to speak to that at all?
So currently, we don't have any requirements. I mean, that's a good point. There's no requirements for approving an MFT presentation, but right. I mean, they wouldn't need to know what they're talking about. They wouldn't, I mean, an MFT, if they're talking on a subject, should, you know, have done research and have knowledge of what they're presenting, but there's nothing in regulation that says that.
I mean,
And you have had people, I'm sorry, I was gonna say, you have had people submit training and continuing ed offerings to you and say, is this board supported or approved?
Yeah, and we can't pre-approve them. That's, yeah, part of the problem.
well, for example, I had a person call me who said, I'm an expert in the Enneagram. Like, I bet they are. And I think it would be a fine thing for them to go do a thing about. But I could say, you know, I'm an expert in and make something up. And should we be concerned about what constitutes the content on any level, or the credential of the person presenting? And I feel like I'm opening a hornet's nest, but I just,
that's a slippery slope, because if, you know, just, there's been several workshops I've gone that I may not agree with everything that instructor is saying, but I'm still there for the hours and listening to their teaching. So.
yeah, I'm just asking. It's a good point, John. Probably better if there's nothing there. It's more free. I just in preparing something one time, I had a lot of social workers ask me, was this approved? I'm like, well, I'm provide you a certificate of what I'm doing. But I'm like, I don't know.
I think you're bringing up a good point that would be good to talk about. I mean, the board has made movements to allow for, you know, right now the social work and psychologists have sort of board approval for continuing education as an entity or a provider of CEUs. You can get approved. Just social work right now, Leslie? Yeah, but there has been discussion about, can we extend that for MFTs and those kind of things? And that offers a level of credibility to how continuing ed is managed, controlled, vetted in terms of speakers and having CV and having outcomes and objectives. So I think there could be a discussion point that we put on to another agenda to flesh that out a little bit more. It's a good discussion to have. Yeah. You know, what makes that a credible event?
Yeah, I'm not trying to raise a big fuss about it. I'll just get asked about it, and this seemed like a venue to bring that up. So I'm not trying to complicate things, and I apologize if I am.
No, that's okay. That's all right. That's what we're here to do, is to
complicate things.
Questions, probe into things a little bit. Does anyone see any, in terms of this form for documentation of continuing education, does anyone see any other things that we'd like to change, or we feel pretty comfortable with that addition and subtraction, adding the certification or certificate of completion, and then removing the self-directed project, and also changing the language in the media formats? Okay. Great, thank you. The next item is our new item of business, which was discussion on adding new members to the advisory committee. So I'm very hopeful that you all had opportunities to review the resumes and applications that came in for potential advisory committee members. I think per our previous conversations, one of the things we were really looking at is staggering membership so that we don't end up with a bunch of people terming off at the same time. And if my memory serves me correctly, we were kind of looking at maybe adding 2 now and then looking at next year and maybe adding a couple of more if that's based on the applicants that we received. So sort of get this conversation rolling of the people who submitted resumes and letters of interest. Are there some people who stand out? And David, again, if you want to say anything before I jump right into it.
Just briefly. So as you mentioned, advisory committee members serve 2-year terms. There is language in the advisory committee policy in terms of how many non-board members can serve on the advisory committee. And so there's a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10. You currently are at 6. So you do have room to add members. And then in the advisory committee policy, there is specific language in terms of the process to review the applicants. It does mention that'll be done in an open meeting, which we're doing right now. The determination can't be by secret ballot, so you have to have open discussions and make recommendations openly. And then under the selection criteria, there is specific language that says in reviewing nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. Members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline, and those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. And I know you've all seen that information before, but I thought it might be helpful just to remind you before you begin to mention which individuals stood out to you as you went through their materials.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So as you reviewed the people who are interested in appointments, were there any people that stood out for you? Jim, are you talking?
You're currently muted.
I didn't know if you were talking to us or talking to yourself, but I thought I better check.
Sometimes I do that too.
I do it all the time.
So I think the one thing that stood out to me as far as looking at the candidates, they were all very qualified in what they do. The one thing that stood out was the geographic location. And I think the only one that really stood out was because of, I know John and I were once in Dodge City, and that we no longer have any Western Kansas individuals. And that was the one that stood out for me as far as the number one.
Yeah, that Lori Hertel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also, thank you for that comment. I also looked at Andrea Dermeyer as, someone who looked like she would be appropriate for this group.
Those were the 2 actually that stuck out to me, which is kind of funny. I was curious. I know that Lori has her LCMFT. I was a little confused on the schooling piece, but I know that there's different programs that will combine, like that make you eligible to apply for both. Like we had a clinician at one point that was an LCP and an LCMFT. And so I was a little curious about that, but it might have been the type of program that they were in at one point too, that made her eligible for that.
Again, I'll just reiterate, we don't have to do 2. We can do 1. We can do any combination you want to. So any other thoughts from this committee? I did pick up on that too, Nicole.
Something that stood out for me for Lori as a reason why I might choose a different person was that she was retired. And so I just wondered about the her ability to be attuned into the current struggles of Kansas licensees.
Good point.
I wondered the same thing, Jardine. Thank you for bringing that up.
I think I was, concerned about that too, because that's one of the things that she did put right up front, was I'm retired.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, that I don't know, geographic setting is the one that I'm always concerned about because of the how we, kind of have certain places that have more possibilities. The other one was Southeast Kansas. I don't know many people that are, have a voice from Southeast Kansas either.
You make a good point, Jim, that perhaps in the next time we request interest, we could even specifically call out geographic location as something we're interested in. Because, yeah, I mean, we don't need 6 people from Wichita to, not that Wichita isn't great. We have great people here, but we'll be overrepresented.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts? Sounds like we may not be convinced on Lori. I suggested an interest in Andrea. We have some discussion there.
Oh, by the way, before I moved on too much further, I did want to verify this. I went back and I looked in terms of the message that we had emailed out to all licensees concerning the opening. And it provided some information about the advisory committee, but it also said when considering applicants, the advisory committee members will work to ensure there is diverse representation on the advisory committee, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. And then it talked about the same language with being among public and private practitioners and educators. And then also, so that language does kind of match the advisory committee policy. But I remember we had previous conversations, at least in another advisory committee, that we wanted to kind of put that forward. And so I thought I remembered that, but I didn't want to say it before I checked it. But that wasn't a language that went out to all the licensees.
Yeah, and I remember that. I think we might have to even specifically at some point, if we feel comfortable, call out areas that we feel like are underrepresented so we can really get more rural involvement.
Yeah.
Good point, Jim.
Yeah.
Another person. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the way that we do our call for applications with just having them write an open letter, it doesn't lend itself to us being able to discern some of those diverse personal factors if they choose not to disclose those. So it does make it difficult to try to meet that if they're not being upfront about it. I think diversity in work environment is the one that I felt like everyone did a really good job of talking about having diverse experiences, which made it really difficult because usually that's where I go first. So, but everybody has diverse work experiences. So yeah, that was just something I think, I don't know if it needs to be an application per se, but even just being more explicit, like you were saying about what it is that we are looking for when we talk about wanting to have a broad perspective, having diverse points of view.
I think that's true. And I think that that's one thing that's hard is that, we're looking for those, but we have no idea of, other than when they put down where they're from.
Right.
As we live in today, that those last 3 things, unless they bring them up, we're kind of doing it blind.
I wonder with even some of the comments that we're having today, if the advisory committee would be interested in resending some interests and even getting I mean, David, we'd have to talk about whether or not what we can ask for more, or in a way to say, you know, we're looking particularly for ensuring diverse advisory committee members of geographic, ethnic, cultural. We could list some things out. I don't know, you know, we'd have to talk about how the appropriateness of that, but I certainly know that's what I'm hearing here. And I think this group is so thoughtful in how it's looking at appointments to this committee and wanting to make sure that we are really representing the work that's done with MFT. So I'm throwing that out now as sort of a, what do you think idea for this group.
Mary, the other thing that I was concerned about, and I think that might, whether you get more applicants this way, is especially from Western Kansas, you know, of saying that all meetings are virtual, as opposed to, you know, if you supposed to, you know, being applying for it, but I don't really want to drive all the way from Liberal to Topeka for a meeting, you know. So, you know, whether that too becomes a problem as far as, you know, holding people back.
So
That's a really good idea.
I was looking in the letter that went out. It did say advisory committee meetings are held remotely over Zoom or at the BSRB office in Topeka.
Yeah.
But you could definitely stress that the majority of those meetings are remote because, right, if people are driving several hours, that could make a difference in whether they would want to volunteer that out.
So for the advisory committee, just is there a sense that there is a really strong urge to appoint one of the resumes applicants that put in this this time from what you reviewed? And if not, could we look at maybe a different type of communication and extending the time period to throw your name in? What are the thoughts?
Are we able to send, once some language can be figured out, maybe some follow-up questions to the ones that have applied? So we do have a group of people. I don't know what would be allowed or not allowed. I was going to mention too, another person that stood out to me was Betsy. I mean, she came from California, so has some experience there. She's doing stuff in both Kansas and Missouri, and she's working, I think, for Optum. So gives a different perspective than maybe a traditional practice setting. But yeah, I don't know if there'd be a way to send up follow-up questions to see if there are some of our currently interested people that would be able to share even their like how they maybe serve diverse populations or, you know, anything along those lines. Yeah, I don't know what would be appropriate or not.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of asking questions of people that have applied. If they could give us some more information. Right. I think we have a really good group here, and that's what's making it difficult, is that any one of them would be a good addition.
That's right.
Do we think that that would be appropriate, David, that we'd be able to do that? Ask some more detailed questions about their...
I think I could ask them, well, what I'm picking up from the conversation right here is I could definitely ask them for some more follow-up information. In terms of the specific way that's phrased, I can run it by legal counsel to make sure that we're not, you know, running into any issues there, because I know that some of these issues need to be handled in a certain way. And so I'll kind of talk broadly about the conversation that happened at the meeting today, and then I can definitely request follow-up information from the applicants who've already submitted materials. And then I can work with legal counsel to see exactly what we can ask or maybe should not ask based on, you know, legal reasons. So.
Sure.
Yeah, something to the effect
really
of,
helpful.
Sorry, Mary, you were.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say something to the effect of like that the advisory committee, you know, values diversity, and we really want to have a broad range of perspectives on the board. Could you share your personal or professional experience with whatever legal counsel says you can call it?
Yeah, I think along those lines, Jardine, there are individuals who have had so much training in working with LGBTQ populations, but they may not identify as LGBTQ, but in that their experience would just be so valuable with that. You know what I mean? And so I that if you, talking about personal or professional experience and training or,
something like that.
Okay, that sounds like good direction from this group. So thank you for that. Thank you for your thoughtfulness in this discussion. And so hopefully we can get something between now and the next meeting so that we can make some more informed decisions before moving forward. So thank you all so much for that. We are at 11:54. And so we will kick the unprofessional conduct regulation standard down the road one more time. And I would like to sort of tee up the discussion of other professionals so you can be really thinking about this item that the board has asked us to bring to our committees. I specifically wanted to bring this to the MFT committee because of, how I view the MFT as a profession. So David, if you could just sort of give us some background and context for this group to think about until the next meeting.
Yes, so that would be on item C for the serving as supervisors. Is that the topic that the other professions serving as board approved supervisors for marriage and family therapy? Yeah, so there was previously language that would allow for individuals from other professions to serve as supervisors, but the language previously talked about if someone was unavailable. And this was before a lot of the language had been opened up to allow supervision by televideo. So the new standard, we allow supervision by televideo, but the language on unavailability has been changed to someone needing to show an extenuating circumstance for needing to have someone else from another profession serve as the supervisor. And so in determining what would qualify as an extenuating circumstance, the language does talk about that it would need to be something unexpected and extreme. But we've had some applicants who have submitted requests for people to serve in that capacity who were not marriage and family therapists. One of the items they had discussed was a cost factor. And so that if it presented a cost reason why they would need someone from another profession to serve as a supervisor, if that would be the type of scenario that might qualify as an extenuating circumstance. Or if there were other possible reasons why something might qualify as an extenuating circumstance. Because the general regulation says that it is supposed to be someone from that profession, but instead of it being unavailable, now it talks about the extenuating circumstance. So that's kind of the lens that I think the board wanted the advisory committee to have a discussion about and to kind of add more clarity to help us as a licensing body be able to enforce a uniform standard when we get these types of questions.
I'm looking forward to this discussion. I've got a supervisee who practiced for 5 years in a setting where there were no LCMFTs available, and so she couldn't count those hours. And so now she's doing it because she has to. She's doing it to check the box, but she's had supervision, but she just couldn't count any of it towards her C. And so I'm excited to talk about this at least and just have a conversation some more. And yeah. And now I'm in a setting where we don't have any LCPCs to provide supervision to our LPCs. And so they're trying to see, and they're trying to rule out all these people. And so they've been in conversation with the BSRB about this. And so I think it'll be great to get some clarification for practitioners as they seek that.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. So I just think it's good for us to understand what the item is so we can think about it between now and the next meeting.
And Mary,
go ahead.
sorry, before we kind of move to the last items in terms of the next meeting, I did want to say you had mentioned on the agenda there was the unprofessional conduct conversation. One item I did want to talk about for the next meeting, the packet you received for this meeting is a little different than what you've seen in the past. It does include quite a bit of other recommendations from other advisory committees. And so I would encourage members to go ahead, if you haven't had the opportunity, please read through that. I think you'll find it very interesting. Just the choices that were made by the other advisory committees on recommendations. And just if you could review those and be prepared to talk about if you want to bring any of that language over to your profession, that would be very helpful.
That's 6B, right?
That would be 6B, yes.
Okay.
Thank you for that, David. It's really helpful. Anything else? Okay, we have the next meeting scheduled for August 11th. Does that seem to work for everyone? We tried to pre-calendar that last time. Okay. Great. If there's no further business, then I think it is time for a motion to adjourn.
So move.
So move.
I'll second.
Thank you. Everyone have a great Friday and rest of your weekend, and I'll be looking forward to seeing you in August.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good.